Hola, welcome to the channel of Spanish speakers, where we all speak Spanish. My name is Lucia, and today I'm going to continue with a series of 12 videos to help you build a solid foundation of basic Spanish and develop your conversational skills to finally hold a conversation with ease, confidence and trust. And now let's go with today's tip to help you learn Spanish. And I recommend to focus on developing listening skills. For the first 6, 9 to 12 months of learning a language, our main focus should be on learning to understand what people are saying. And you may say, Lucia, can't I speak? Can't I say hello? Can't I say yes? Can't I say no? Of course you can. Can speak whatever you want. What I mean with this tip is that my recommendation is that your main focus is on listening. Okay? So now you've got a plan for these first months or periods of learning Spanish. Focus on listening skills, developing your understanding of Spanish. Today's lesson is about the present. Okay, present is a time of our verbs, yes, and it reminds you of the word present. As we say, the present is a present, and the beauty here is that in Spanish it's the same. We've got presente, present, and it also means a present. In Spanish we have two words for present, presente and regalo, but they're both valid, okay? Anyway, so now that we've got clear the time, the present comes under the criteria of time. Okay, what does that mean? Let me explain. When we use the verbs, we have different criteria, different approaches to find out how to use, analyze, understand our verb. Okay? So one of the main ones is the time frame. That is the one that we all relate to, and children also get used to how to move in between time. Sometimes they even struggle about things that happen in the present, things that happen in the past, things that happen in the future, because children live mainly in the present, and that's what we also need to do. And now we are going to study the present, okay? So in our timeline, it's now, present, before, past, and it will happen, future, going to be, okay? So that's our timeline. And the one that we first need to master, that we need to master first, we need to learn first, of course, obviously, it's what's happening now, because that's the most important time. Today we are going to learn about the irregular forms in Spanish in the present, okay? Because I know what happens. You all want to learn about the past and the future, and you still haven't mastered the present, okay? You following me? Important is first learn your present. Well, because it's a present. After, we can worry about the past and about the future, okay? If you learn everything together, tip, yes? If you learn everything together, then you won't have clarity. And in languages, clarity is everything, okay? So now let's move on to our irregular verbs in the present tense in Spanish, okay? We are going to learn them in 3 different groups, okay? We're going to learn specific irregular forms only in the first person singular, so in your, in I, and irregular forms with a vowel change in Spanish, okay? Let's go ahead. You ready to start? Vamos! Now let's start with our first group of irregular verbs. The first one would be all the verbs that are irregular in the I form, in la forma de yo. They belong to a group together. And why to a group? Because if we learn in groups, it's much easier for us to understand and then to remember, because we know that those verbs belong to a group. So, group of verbs that are irregular in the first person singular in the form of I in Spanish. Yo. Tenemos. We're going to subdivide also in another 3 groups. On the one hand, we've got estar and dar. Let's go with estar. Estar is irregular in first person singular. Estoy. And the rest of the verb is regular. Estás, está, estamos, estáis, and están. Bien? The same as dar, dar, to give. Doy, das, da, damos, dais, and dan. Yes? Then, so these two belong to a subgroup. Estoy y doy. They end in a Y in the first person singular. Okay? And the rest of the form, remember, is always regular, following the pattern of the regular verbs. Then we've got another subgroup is saber and ver. Okay? So, for example, saber is also irregular in the first person singular. And instead of saying sabo, we say sé. Sé, sabes, sabe, sabemos, sabéis, and saben. Notice that after sé, the rest of the verb follows the pattern of the regular verbs in the present. The same as ver, see, ¿vale? Veo, ves, ve, vemos, veis, and ven. Veo is irregular because if it wasn't, it would be vo, and vo sounds strange. So it's veo. Veo to see, saber to know. Yeah? And then the third subgroup of verbs that are irregular in the first person singular are the verbs that end in go, like salir. We've got salir, salgo. You all know salir, salir to leave, to exit. At the airport we've got salidas. Most of you have that contact with Spain if you've come in through a Spanish airport. We've got salir, to leave, salgo. We've got hacer, to do, hago, hago, haces, hace. And then we've got poner, to put, poner, pongo, pones, poner. Okay, so this is another subgroup. Verbs that end in go are irregular in the first person singular. And now let's move on to the second group of verbs that are irregular in Spanish. This group is called verbs with a vowel change. Okay, what is that of a vowel change? Vowel change is something that happens to the vowels specifically in Spanish. So out of all the Romantic languages like French, Portuguese, modern Italian, Romanian, the only language that is Romanic, that comes from Roman, is Spanish, that does the vowel changes. So it's something that happens only in Spanish. For example, U goes into UE in poder, poder, to be able to. In English, can. Puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, y pueden. And then another verb that does the vowel changes would be mover, muevo, mueves, mueve, movemos, movéis, y mueven. And another verb inside this subgroup of verbs that turn from the U into UE, the U and UE, would be contar. Contar, to count. Cuento, cuentas, cuenta. Contamos, contáis, y cuentan. Yes. And as most of you may be noticing by now, that in nosotros and vosotros, no vowel change occurs. When we come to nosotros and vosotros, we go back to our main infinitive stem of the verb. For example, poder would go into podemos. Contar goes into contamos, contáis. Y mover goes into movemos and movéis. The same as our stem. Okay? Oh yes, just quickly. What do these verbs mean? Poner, to put, mover, to move, and contar, to count. ¿Vale? Okay. Now let's move on to our next subgroup of verbs with a vowel change. Would be the verbs that go from e into ie, from an e into an ie. ¿Vale? That's it. Okay, and the first example of this group of verbs would be comenzar, to commence, or to begin or to start something. So we've got comenzar, comenzar. The E from men would go into IE, and I would say comienzo, comienzas, comienza. Comenzamos, comenzáis y comienzan. Okay? A highly recommended verb to commence because it's similar to English. Then we go on to divertir, to divert, to entertain. Okay? To have fun. Divierto, diviertes, divierte. Divertimos, divertís y divierten. And then let's go to our last example of this subgroup of verbs in ie, that would be the verb perder. Perder goes like this. Pierdo, pierdes, pierde. Perdemos, perdéis, pierden. El tiempo. Perder el tiempo. Yes, that's right. To lose the time. To lose your time. Or to waste time. Okay? Perder. Things that we can perder. Las llaves, the keys. El teléfono móvil, our mobile phones. Perder el teléfono móvil, ¿vale? Perder el tiempo, perder las llaves, perder el teléfono móvil. Muy bien! And now, let's move on to the last subgroup of verbs that are irregular in the first person singular. And now, let's move on to the third subgroup of verbs that are irregular because of the vowel change. And here we have the group E that changes into E, from an E into an E, from an E into an I. Okay? And let's go with some examples. Okay, the first example is the verb servir. Yes, you guessed it, to serve. And we would have sirvo, sirves, sirve, servimos, servís y sirven. Then let's go with the second one. Corregir, corregir, to correct. Corrijo, corriges, corrigen. Corregimos, corregís y corrigen. And finally, we've got despedir. Despido, despides, despide. Despedimos, despedís y despiden. Means to say goodbye, ¿vale? Decir adiós es despedir. And finally, let's go with the third group of irregular verbs. And this group is called specific irregularities. So these ones are like isolated. They sort of stand a bit on their own, but we are still going to subdivide them in two main groups. Okay? So let's go with the first one. The first one would be tengo, tener, to have. Tengo, tienes, tienen, tenemos, tenéis, and tienen. That is very similar to vengo. Vengo is to come. Vengo, vienes, viene. Venimos, venís, y vienen. Notice that these two verbs are very similar. If I say tengo, vengo. Tienes, vienes. Tiene, viene. Tenemos, venimos. Tenéis, venís. Y tienen, vienen. Yes? To have and to come are very similar in the conjugation. Of course, not in the meaning. But vengo, remember that it's the opposite of ir, to go. That's also inside this category of specific irregular verbs in the present form. okay? And then we have another verb that belongs to this subcategory would be, so together with tengo and vengo, would be oír, to listen, and decir, to say. So let's go first with oír, to listen, oigo, oyes, oye, oímos, oís, y oyen, and then decir, to say, digo, dices, dice, decimos, decís, y dicen, okay? And then the second subgroup of specific irregularities would be ser and ir. Ser, soy, eres, es, somos, sois, y son. Notice that this verb stands very much on its own because it's very particular in the way that it's constructed. It has no connection with other verbs, and therefore it's necessary to learn it and practice it. And then we've got ir, that is the opposite of venir. So we've got ir is to go, venir is to come, okay? So we've got ir, and in the present of ir, to go, is voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, y van. Okay? And that's it for today. So I'm just quickly going to recap what I was explaining. It's the irregular verbs in the present form, present time, 10, yes? And we've got three main groups. The group of verbs that are irregular in the first person singular, the group of verbs that are irregular because they have a vowel change, and then the group of verbs that are irregular because they have specific irregularities, okay? And each one of these groups are subdivided in groups, okay? The group of verbs that are irregular in the first person singular can be, for example, estar and dar, that they have a Y, the ones that are ending in go, yes, or the ones that are se or veo, yes, saber and ver. Then the ones that have a vowel change are subdivided in three groups, the U in ue, O in ue, and E in I. And then the verbs that have specific irregularities. They have specific irregularities. For example, ser, soy, ir, voy, venir, vengo, tener, tengo. And then we also subdivide them, remember? In the ones that end in go and the ones that are even more specific, ser and ir. Okay, so with this I hope that you have a lot more clarity referring to the present. I recommend that you focus on the present, and when you can use the present with certain easiness, then try to move on to another time that could be ideally in the future. I am going to do something, I'm going to do that. Yes? Okay, and now let's go with today's tip. Today's tip is about engaging our analytical brain to find information behind a situation. For example, I go to a new restaurant versus I go to a restaurant that I already know. If I go to a new restaurant, I want to engage my analytical brain and work out, do other customers seem happy? Is the restaurant clean? Do the waiters look happy? Does it look very expensive or not? What does the food look like? Is it the type of food that I'm going to like? And in this way, pick up information that is free. Because often when we are in a situation in a foreign land, we're like, oh gosh, what's going on? And if you take a step back, stay calm, engage your analytical brain, you will pick up a lot of información gratis. So there is today's tip. Stay calm in any situation to pick up the information that's behind the scene and engage your analytical I'm going to end this video with a very warm adios to all of you. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Very interesting about ser y estar in Spanish and the difference between these two verbs.